Hi there, it's afternoon where I am. This is Jason from English Raven, so good afternoon, or good morning, or good evening, wherever you happen to be when you watch this. This is another addition to the Open English set of resources, and I've named this one Turn the Page. Um, and as you can see, we've sort of got a reading and a books theme for this one, or a libraries theme. Look, it could go into all sorts of areas depending on you and your students. That's the whole point of Open English, is that we start with something fairly broad and that we then manipulate in ways that, based on interactions with the students, what seems to appeal or what seems to be something that could be talked about and explored. Now, what you're looking at with this template might at first look quite boring. Because over here on A we've got what looks like basically a writing framework, and B is exactly the same. You might be thinking, oh my goodness, this looks so bland and so uninteresting. But the reality is, in a lot of the classes I teach, writing is important, and in a lot of the classes I've taught in the past, and most learners recognize that. And it's usually a pretty important part of the curriculum. So it's good to have a nice simple framework set up that can facilitate that. Now, with this general theme of reading and books and libraries and that sort of thing, remember, if writing is not sort of the avenue you'd like to take or the skill focus you'd like to take, you could always cut and paste different activity types from the other Open English templates, because it's all open source. You can cut and paste something in here that might have more of a vocabulary or a dialogue focus or whatever it is, pronunciation, whatever it is you'd like to sort of utilize in relation to this theme. But what I'm actually going to show you as well is that this doesn't just have to be about writing. It doesn't just have to be about essay writing even. When you've got an open grid like this and an open framework with lines, there's so many different things you could be doing with that. And it could involve a lot of integration of reading, listening, and speaking, as well as writing. So first I'll just outline how I might use this as a writing resource. What I would probably do is have the students look at this picture. We'd have a quick chat about it, and I would then ask students in this margin here to come up with, say, 2 questions that they could ask somebody in relation to this theme. And the sorts of questions they might come up with are: do you like reading? Do you read a lot? But you might, in some classes, actually get some more interesting questions like, is it better to read online? Are books going to die? Are books going to disappear? Never underestimate the student's ability to come up with things that are a little bit more out of the box and a little bit more left field. But the key point is, with an open approach, at least we can get those things from the students rather than dictating to them. So you notice I haven't actually written in a topic. I think that's something that should be negotiated and elicited from the students. So I would get students to come up with a couple of questions. We would then share those questions as a class, and then I would say, well, based on these questions, I'd write them all down on the whiteboard, the better ones anyway, and in my opinion, the better ones. And then I would say, look, choose one of these topics and write an essay based on it. So if the question was, do you like reading, I might add a couple of things like why or why not. Do you do a lot of reading? I might add, what are 3 kinds of books that you generally like to read? Something like that. Just some sort of additional little bit of information there that will help them, get them going in terms of being able to write about a couple of different aspects of that topic. So if it was, do you like reading, why or why not, I would point them to the idea of, if they do like reading, well, give me 3 reasons, and they would become the 3 body paragraphs here. Look, it depends a little bit on how much exposure your students have had to basic writing, whether they're familiar with a basic 5-paragraph, introduction, 3 body paragraphs and a conclusion format. And you may not like to build up to that through other resources and other methods first, but if your learners are sort of ready for this sort of thing, you could just make this about writing. We would write our topics up here. Then probably what I would do is, once students have written something here, is to get a bit of peer feedback from one or two other students. That is, share their essays around and get their friends to write some comments here. And then as a teacher, I might pick up the writing and take it home, or get around to each student. Depends how big the group is and how advanced they are in terms of their writing ability. Try to get around and give a bit of feedback to each student, and that's the beauty of this margin. There's room to actually put some of that feedback in, and based on that, we flip the sheet over and we write a better draft. So based on that first attempt in A, plus some feedback from peers and teacher, you don't have to make peer feedback in that. It could be just something that you pick up and mark and put feedback on. Personally, I like to involve the class as much as possible, and then they'll use that to try and write a better second draft. And then we could extend that even further and make these into mini speeches that the students get up and perform. And if we want to really challenge them, we might say, now take it home and memorize what you've written and come in and talk about it without looking at what you've written. That might be something if you really do want to push your students a little bit further down the track. So that's kind of a basic writing application, but as I said, it doesn't necessarily need to be that kind of essay format. So for example, if I go back to A, I might use this space completely differently, and I might focus a little bit more on interaction, for example, and discussion. So I might ask the students to come up with 3 questions relevant to this theme and write them on these 3 lines in that introduction box. So they might come up with, do you like reading? What kind of books do you like to read? How often do you read? It could be anything like that. And then they can then interview 3 other students in the class by getting around and talking to their classmates, and they could write in the answers they get from each student for each one of these questions. That's one way of doing it. Another way of doing it would be to have your 3 questions here. To have 1 key question and then to create 2 follow-up questions in relation to that first question. And that's great for showing them how to extend a topic, how to explore a little deeper. So if it's do you enjoy reading, what is good about reading for you, and what kinds of books do you like to read? They're sort of extending out of that key question. That's another way you can set up the question side of it. Another thing you might like to do is to just have that first question, label it 1, and you only ask that question to 1 student. The second question is asked to a different student. The third question is asked to another student. Or all 3 questions are asked to 1 student. And then the challenge is for the student who's interviewing is, obviously if we ask 1 question here and it only takes up 2 lines, the answer, or even 1 line, the challenge will then be, well, how are you going to fill out the rest of this box? And that encourages the idea of extending and adding on to your question to find out more information in relation to the question. So that might sound a bit complex. It's something that I might use with students that have already got a pretty good established reputation, are a little bit used to my teaching style. They know I'll push them and stretch them to think and try new stuff. But that idea of taking 1 simple bland answer and then trying to find out more from the person just to get a richer response, that's another way I might use this. Now, based on either an essay here or a series of interactions in an interview style format, for B, instead of writing a second draft, what I might do is do something I call interactive. Oh, sorry, I missed one thing. What do you do with the conclusion box here? Sorry. In that conclusion box, based on the questions and the responses we got, however we sort of facilitated that final box there is a great chance for the student to indicate which of the 3 students they most sort of agree with or are similar to, and the one they are sort of least similar to, and the one who's in the middle. So that's an interesting way they can evaluate the information they got from 3 different students or on 3 different topics with 1 student, and they can just find out how much in common they have with each of the students or with each of the topics. And that's a really good way to sum up that information. And it's great to be able to then report that to the class. So getting back to what I was going to say about B, whether we've got an essay in A or a series of interactions and information from A, in B we can do something that I call interactive dictation. And that is based on the information that was gathered and written here in A, and with some feedback from peers and teacher. What they're going to do is they're going to dictate their essay to another student. So the B section here will be another student's performance written down on their sheet in A. And basically in pairs, and sometimes you can do it in threes as well, they will dictate their essays to each other, preferably across the room or at some distance from each other, so that they can't just lean over and look at what the other student wrote. They'll need to read out their performance in A or their information in A, and there'll be recasts. They'll have to ask for clarification. Can you repeat that? How do I spell this? How do I spell that? Did you say blah blah blah? Really rich chance to explore that idea of dictation, but it's run by the students themselves. So that's something I found is a really dynamic activity to use in the classroom. I call it interactive dictation, and they'll negotiate that content together. One student will read their performance in A, and their partner will write that down in B, and then they'll swap. The other student will then read their content from A, and B will attempt to write it down. Then they can get together and compare their papers and actually have a look. So the information that's done here in B, they go and sit next to their partner and actually have a look at what they wrote and compare and take notes, and any sort of corrections they need to make. So interactive dictation is another great way of using this. Another thing you could do is, based on however you generated material here, you could just repeat it with a different topic. Because what I find is students often do things a little bit better the second time around, based on the experience and the lessons learned from trying something once. Often if they do it again but with a different topic or different prompts, it feels more familiar. They can sort of get to it a bit quicker, but bear in mind that some students find it really boring to do the same style thing again. But something like interactive dictation I find never fails. Students really get into that, and it's a really good way of encouraging them to make their English comprehensible, and to ask questions and to get that kind of clarification, and then compare what they got down with what the student said on the original piece of paper. So that's there's a series of sort of ideas on how you might use this template. As I said, it's all open source, so you can go in here, you could delete these boxes if you want, and you could go with something completely different based on your own text box design or your own input there. Or you can go to those other templates that have already been generated. This is the 8th, I think, the 8th Open English format, so there's plenty of other activity formats that you can cut and paste in here and do things completely different within this same given theme of reading and books. So lots of options for you. It's just all about different ideas. Just bear in mind it's always about being open, and that is drawing content and ideas out of the students to begin with, and then letting them run with that and just helping them improve it and get better at it. It's not about pre-setting topics or pre-setting. Some teachers can do that. You might actually like to go and actually type in the topic here, if that suits your style and the style of your students. But I always encourage people to interact with their students, have quick discussions based on these general themes in the pictures, and then generate the topics or the activity ideas together, and really involve your learners in this process. You'll find it really pays off, and they come up with some great ideas. And I think they genuinely appreciate being part of the process of designing the activity, but also what sort of content is going to be dealt with in that activity. So there's another Open English for you. I hope that it's given you some ideas, and I'll see you in another installment of Open English very soon. This is Jason from English Raven. Thanks for being on board.